let's just take a few moments to arrive. Now that we've tuned in and we're sitting in front of our devices, let's let's take a few minutes just to arrive in the present moment. So please sit in any position that you feel comfortable. Really, any position that you feel comfortable. And give yourself the gift of letting your hands be empty. Let your hands be free of devices. Let your hands be free of keyboards just for a moment. Allow your eyes to close gently if that feels right for you. And take a few breaths. Just breathe gently in and exhale gently and fully. It's the end of the day for you. You might like to imagine you're breathing out any stresses. If it's the beginning or middle of the day for you, you might like to imagine you're breathing in some fresh morning energy. Whatever you like. Whatever you like. After taking a few breaths, bring your awareness inside and just take a moment to scan through your body. Notice whatever's present for you right now, whatever energy or emotions. Maybe you're feeling a little bit drowsy. Perhaps you're feeling fresh and alive. Simply notice whatever energy is present for you and see if you can allow it to be this way, just for a few breaths. You don't need to work on it. You don't need to fix it. Just letting it be, even just for one breath. And if you like, if it feels right for you, you might like to place one or both hands over your heart or any other gesture that you like, a gesture of kindness and recognition. And just take a moment to feel these hands. Notice how that feels and just savor it. Perhaps imagining that you're welcoming yourself, greeting yourself with a smile. Just recognizing that there's a person here. The person who's feeling the contact of this hand is a human being. A human being with so many wonderful strengths, with hopes and desires. And a human being who isn't perfect either, because no human beings are perfect. And a human being who needs and deserves understanding and kindness, because all human beings need and deserve understanding and kindness, simple kindness. And as you breathe, if you like, if it feels right for you, please join me in a moment of gratitude. A moment of gratitude for this simple breath, gratitude for this human body, . I'm grateful for all my teachers, all the teachers who have guided me, who have shared knowledge and skills with me, who have made it possible for me to be able to share those skills with other people. I'm grateful for the blessings that I've received from all those teachers. And then gently smiling and opening your eyes. Welcome, welcome, welcome. Very glad to see everyone here. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Ben Weinstein. I'm a clinical psychologist. I have been based in Bangkok, Thailand for the last 20 plus years, where I am a university lecturer. I have a private practice, and I'm also a teacher of mindful self-compassion, Kristen Neff and Christopher Germer's transformative program to develop our inner resources of mindfulness and self-compassion. Recently, Chris and Kristen published a new book about self-compassion for burnout. And I got really excited when I saw that book. I immediately went and got a copy and have been looking at it and reading it and thinking about it in recent weeks. And I very, very much wanted to be able to share that with people. As someone who experienced burnout after COVID, I know what it's like. And of course, I have innumerable clients over the years and now who have experienced burnout, and I've helped them to walk on the path of recovery from burnout. And research is indicating that more than ever, so many of us are experiencing burnout in one form or another, that it feels very important to be able to share these tools and skills as much as possible. And that's what I hope to do in the next 75 or 80 minutes. So let me begin. And I welcome you all to share in the chat, to share questions or reactions. I'll do my best to juggle sharing what I want to share and keeping an eye on the chat. So let me share my screen again. And we're off. So the things that I hope to cover in the next 75 minutes, I just want to talk about what is burnout, because there are a lot of misconceptions about burnout and how it works. And so I'd like to really do a quick summary of the research and let you do a self-assessment. I'd like to talk about what is self-compassion and how can it help. I know that many of you already took the MSc program, but a number of people have signed up for the webinar who either had self-directed study or no experience at all with self-compassion. So I want to make sure that we're all on the same ground. And then, very importantly, I want to devote about 50 minutes to sharing some self-compassion tools for burnout. I have 6 different tools that I want to share with you today. And I don't just want to share them. At least for 5 of the 6 tools, I'd like to take a few minutes for us to practice together so that you can actually see how it connects for you. And if you have questions, have a chance to ask those questions. And I hope to leave some time at the end for Q&A. How can you get the most from this webinar? Because it can be difficult to learn online. And it's going to be a little bit full on today. So let me invite you, if it's possible for you, to focus fully and minimize distractions, if that's possible. If it's not, don't worry, there'll be a recording. I'll share the recording on YouTube so that you can replay any parts or practices that feel useful for you. I encourage you to take notes about whatever connects for you. And in fact, some of the exercises we'll be doing will be written reflections. I believe we'll be doing 2 written reflections in the course of the webinar. So it will be useful if you have pen and paper ready. And I'll explain why, because written reflections help us to focus, to concentrate. And for some of these skills, concentration is really useful. And then after the webinar, to get the most out of it, I hope that you'll schedule some moments to practice the things that we talk about, if you like. but no one will be checking. So these are just some suggestions to get the most from the webinar. So let's dive straight in. And in fact, let me let's start with a self-assessment about whether or not you're experiencing burnout. And this is a list that's taken from Christopher Germer's and Kristen Neff's recent book, Mindful Self-Compassion for Burnout. I've actually added 3 or 4 items as well that were not on the original list, which I believe are important. So you can just kind of make a note of how many of these do you feel apply to you. And let me just say, this is not a scientifically based survey that's been validated or published. This is just a thumbnail, an informal self-assessment. Are you feeling less motivated to do your work than you have in the past? Are you feeling always stressed and feel that you never get a break? Are you finding yourself becoming more impatient or irritable? Do you feel that you are less productive, or are you receiving feedback that you're less productive? Is the stress of your work spilling outside of work into your personal relationships and at home? So your work stress is affecting you. And again, for each one of these you feel is true, just make a little tick mark. Are you becoming anxious or depressed about your work? Have you started to feel resentful or cynical about your job or your workplace? And lastly, do you dread going to work? Maybe on Sunday evenings, when you know Monday is coming tomorrow, you start to feel intensely anxious, you feel you can't sleep, or perhaps start to have anxiety attacks on Sunday night or Monday morning. So these are the first 8 items. I have another 5 or 6 items I want to check in with you. Is your work affecting your sleep or your libido, your sexual drive? Are you having difficulty concentrating? Do you feel hopeless or overwhelmed by what's happening at work or in the area you're feeling burned out about? Do you just want to be left alone on your own, away from other people? Are you starting to use food, alcohol, drugs to numb the stresses you feel? Or are you developing physical problems like headaches or stomach problems? So just as an informal measure, if you answered yes to more than 5 or 6 of these questions, that should start to come as a wake-up call for you. And if you answered yes to most of them, to 10 or more, I think that you need to seriously consider that you're in a state of burnout. So let's talk about how we define burnout, because this is a little bit complicated because mental health professionals don't have an agreement yet. In North America, burnout is not recognized as a psychological condition. And that's because the research about burnout hasn't been very good. We know it exists, but just because, and I just want to say this because, as scientists, when we put on our scientist hat, mental health professionals haven't been very good about defining disorders and problems. We didn't know PTSD was a disorder until the 1980s, scientifically, even though many people knew for decades before that people had post-traumatic stress. So now recently, the World Health Organization did define burnout, and it has been adopted as a definition in Europe. So their burnout has 3 components. Number 1, a sense of complete exhaustion or depletion of energy. People have become completely exhausted. Number 2, a person has increasing mental distance from their work or whatever project is causing their burnout. It might be volunteering as well. It doesn't have to be paid work. Or this mental distance can take the form of having a really negative attitude about one's work or becoming cynical about one's work, which, like, something that I see, I have a lot of clients who are humanitarian or development workers. And one of the signs of moderate to severe burnout among humanitarian workers is that they lose faith in their organizations. They work for global organizations like UNICEF or Save the Children or various different agencies. And they develop a sense that the work of the organization is meaningless. We're just pushing paper around, or we're not really helping anyone. This is a sense of cynicism. And it's one of the signs of advanced burnout. And the third sign is just reduced effectiveness, reduced accomplishment, reduced productivity in our work compared to where we used to be. I want to point out that this is end stage burnout. And burnout actually exists like depression or like other things. It exists on a spectrum where a person can start to be mildly burned out or show signs of incipient burnout. But if those signs are ignored, they can progressively go deeper and deeper into burnout. This is what I have observed as a clinician. So these three are characteristics of what I would call end stage burnout. And one of the things that I've learned from my clients and from my own experience is that end stage burnout is a really serious psychological injury. It's like having broken a leg or having sprained a leg and needing to be on crutches while your leg is healing. That a person's ability to be motivated, to be focused. In my case, it was a sense of no longer having space to do my work, which is very important for a therapist, to have a sense of spaciousness. That can take months to recover. And the speed of your recovery will depend on how far burnout has progressed for you. So this is an opportunity for each one of us. I want to talk really quickly about the work factors, because one of the things we need to understand about burnout is that recent surveys suggest that burnout has become incredibly common. That in some surveys of people around the world, up to 30 or 40% of the people responding to the survey indicate that they are showing significant signs of burnout. I mean, that's remarkable. We're talking about 1 in 3 people, or almost to half. And in certain professions, especially healthcare, it's even higher, as well as in teaching. So there are a number of work-related factors. I think you all are familiar with these. I'm not going to read you the list, but there's a lot of things that can happen at work that really stress us out, especially when there's, I used to work in the government healthcare system in the United States, which is for veterans. And they used to tell us, we need you to do more with less. We need you to do more than with less. And we would have a joke. We had a joke, and the joke was, next year they're going to ask us to do everything with nothing. We had a lot of workload and not many resources, but of course a lot of us really cared about our work and felt that our work was very meaningful, that we're providing health services to people who serve their country. So that was valuable. But many people did eventually start to burn out, and I think more and more. Workplace dysfunction is another important factor. If there's toxicity in the workplace, if there's bullying or unfairness, micromanaging or undermining, especially from a supervisor, this can create a lot of stress around work. So there's a lot of things at work, depending on the workplace, that may not fit with us. Another big issue is what people call work-life balance, and when life gets out of balance. And this, when the demands of our life outweigh the resources for an extended period. For example, family responsibilities, that in addition to work, we may have children to take care of. In an Asian family, people may have aging parents that they feel very directly responsible for. And that there is a family expectation and a social expectation. This, in general, globally, and in Asia in particular, this falls more heavily on women than on men. It's one of the big factors in burnout for women, is a kind of greater sense of responsibility for these burdens. Of course, everyone is encouraged to have a side hustle, right? To be finding a way to have some projects on the side, to network, to develop new income streams or opportunities. A person may experience crises. A person might experience a medical crisis, a health issue, or chronic pain. One of the things that brought me into burnout was a medical crisis where I developed a neck injury and then went through about 8 months of being in really significant pain most days of the week and had to do physical therapy and acupuncture and all those things. And that started to deplete me. I got out of balance. So I've really appreciated because my workplace, and I just want to make this point because there's different ways. My workplace doesn't have any of these features. I'm self-employed and I can control what happens in my workplace. So when I started to get burnout, I was able to reduce my workload, but I was experiencing a medical crisis and chronic pain, which really depleted my energy. And I also was doing a lot of work and webinars and different things at the same time, all different projects that I didn't cut back on soon enough. So there's different ways. And now let's take a few minutes to just talk about the psychological risk factors, because these are important. These are modifiable. These are things that we can control, although I'm not going to focus on them directly. I might do another webinar where I talk about these psychological risk factors. The first psychological risk factor is caring deeply about what you're doing. Now, this may sound ironic, but the more a person cares about the work that they do, increases the risk of burnout when there is imbalance or toxicity. So this is because what the things that we care deeply about is where we could become disappointed. Many people who become humanitarian workers because of a deep sense of caring or a deep sense of justice or wanting to make the world a better place. And that line of work is very, very difficult. That you see there's never an end to the crises and wars that are going on, even if people don't hear about them. Right now, many people aren't aware there's a civil war in Myanmar. It's not being reported on in the media in most of the world, so most people are not aware of it. Humanitarian workers are doing, there's many people who are working on that. And people who go from one crisis to another may start to feel burned out because they care so much about it. Or if they feel their organization isn't being effective or effective enough. Another vulnerability, one that I see in many of my clients, is the sense of self-worth comes from work. And we're gonna talk about this, and I'm gonna try and give a self-compassion skill to address this. So this is for many people have a sense that their value comes from working hard. My value as a human being, my value as a person, the value of my life comes from how hard I work, or how other people perceive my work. So this causes many people to become workaholics, to put work ahead of other things, and to not be able to say no or set limits around work. So this can pose a real challenge. Some people have a sense of self-sacrifice. And again, I think this applies more to women than to men in general. But of course, each individual is different. That caring for others becomes more important than caring for ourselves. And of course, women are socialized around the world to be self-sacrificing more than men. Every individual is different, and it's not entirely based on gender, but this is a truth about how women are socialized. There's data supporting this. And lastly, perfectionism. Perfectionists are at very great risk of burnout when there is high workload or lack of control over workload or low resources, because perfectionists won't compromise, won't do a job that's good enough versus doing something that's perfect every time. This is a kind of, from a therapeutic perspective, a perfectionist is someone with rigid standards who doesn't adapt when conditions change. And I'm going to give you a self-compassion skill later in the webinar for the perfectionists um, uh, to work on and to try and tune in more and accept more kind of being human. So these four factors are psychological risk factors for burnout that we can work on. We maybe can't control what's going on in the workplace, but these are risk factors that we can work on. And the last one, which is also very easy to work on, is self-blame. Self-blame is like an accelerant for burnout. So what does that mean, right? If you have a fire and you pour gasoline on the fire, the gasoline is an accelerant that intensifies the flame. Self-blame, if you're already in a state of burnout, you're feeling tired and fatigued, your work product isn't the same as it used to be, you're not keeping up, maybe your boss has criticized you. When you add self-blame to that, what's wrong with me? Why am I like this? I suck. Whatever form that self-blame takes, that's an accelerant. It's like throwing gasoline on a fire. And self-blame of these five is the most modifiable. Everything we're going to work on today will focus on removing this element of self-blame implicitly. So let's just take a quick review of the warning signs. And the warning signs are going to look very similar to that self-assessment. So you can start checking them. So the first three are the key ones. These are the starred ones. When you see a decline in performance, when there's a decline in your productivity or work quality, or you have developed a negative outlook about work, you feel resentful or hopeless or trapped, or you feel emotionally drained and overwhelmed with your work. One of these three needs to be present. So if you have one of these three already, please make note. And then the more you of the coming ones, these are the ones that's different for different people. But in order to say that it's burnout, at least one of these three, or that you're on a pathway to burnout, at least one of these three needs to be present. And then, have you lost interest? So for example, one of the things that happened to me was because of my pain, I had to stop exercising. And I had the habit of exercising 5 or 6 days a week that went back for about 15 years prior to my injury. And when I was injured, I had to stop exercising. After 8 to 10 months, I could have started exercising again. The pain was under control. The situation was under control, but I didn't. I had lost the interest and motivation in doing the things that I had once enjoyed, in particular exercise, which is it's something I did enjoy and I enjoy now. Also, isolation, withdrawing from social interactions and feeling detached from others. So again, please continue doing that self-assessment. Do you feel chronically fatigued? Are you having difficulty falling asleep or staying asleep? Are you having difficulty concentrating or feeling forgetful? What about physical symptoms like headaches, muscle pain, stomach aches? A lot of people experience burnout as a set of physical symptoms, like office syndrome can become something that contributes to burnout. Because office syndrome is a sign that we need to take better care of our body and we need to have more movement during our day. And of course, becoming increasingly irritable. So again, look out for these warning signs. So let's talk about the usual prescription for recovery from burnout. What is the usual way? So the usual way is that people tell you need to rest, right? You need to get more sleep. And I tell you, the clients that I've seen and in my own experience, once you reach end stage burnout, where you have all three of those characteristics from the World Health Organization, you need a lot of sleep. You need a lot of sleep. I've had clients who had to go for months once they were able to, they once they had the skills to help them sleep, they were able to sleep for 8 hours a day for months on end. And the energy only slowly started to come back. Again, that's about end stage, when a person has really gone into a severe burnout. A person also needs relaxation skills, because sometimes they've gotten so tense for so long that their body has forgotten how to relax. And we have very good relaxation skills, muscle relaxation skills, like listening to music relaxation. The person has to intentionally start to relax their central nervous system. They have to work on self-care and their hobbies. What are they filling their time with that helps them to relax? Exercise. The research is very clear that exercise is an extremely important component. Have to develop better skills for coping with stress, for recognizing and coping with stress. Maintaining a healthy diet, because for some people in burnout or on the way to burnout, I worked with one person whose diet for months prior to collapsing was candy. Keeping candy in a drawer at work and having piles of candy at home. Literally running on nothing but sugar. And of course, three important things: being able to set boundaries, maybe say no. These are part of getting, and for some people, not for everyone, making life changes is part of getting out of burnout. And then, of course, remembering that there's always professional help. There's always going to see, especially for end stage burnout, going to consult with a psychiatrist who may be able to prescribe helpful medication, or seeing a counselor who can help emerge from burnout. So these are the usual prescriptions. But today, I'm going to talk about something else. I'm going to talk about something in addition to these, because one of the weaknesses of all of these things is that they require time. You need time to practice relaxation skills. You need time to exercise. You need time to cope with stress, or to work on your diet, to shop for the food you need, or to take time to cook the healthy food you need. Making life changes is scary, and not everybody's going to do it. If you're a woman or a man who's responsible both to do her job and take care of children and take care of parents, you might not be able to get a full night's sleep, right? You may be living in a society where there's so much stigma, you're not going to reach out to a counselor. All of these things are real. So we're going to talk about self-compassion, because self-compassion is a tool, as you'll see, that once we start to use it, once we invest a little bit of time and energy to learn it, self-compassion, we don't need extra time to use self-compassion. Self-compassion is a skill we can use anywhere, anytime. And let's start with that. I'm going to share 6 tools with you in this webinar. And let's start with the first tool, which is noticing how you treat yourself. So I'm going to ask you to do a visualization, and then at the end of the visualization, maybe make some notes for yourself. Okay? So if you're ready, please put down your devices, put down your pens for a moment, sit in a comfortable position, and close your eyes. Take a few breaths. And I want you to imagine that you had a dear friend or a dear colleague, a colleague you really respect and care about, who's a good worker, and one day at work, they come to you and they let you know that they're exhausted and they're feeling completely burned out by the job. Maybe they have things happening at home. Maybe other things are happening in their life. Maybe this has actually happened to you. Maybe you have this experience. But if it hasn't, I want you to imagine that this dear colleague or dear friend comes and tells you that they're feeling burned out. And I want you to imagine at the same time, you're in a strong and centered place. You are feeling in balance and good. At that moment, what would you say to your friend? How would you respond? what kind words of encouragement would you offer them, or what kind of tone? I want you to imagine the tone that you'd use in speaking to your colleague or your friend. And would you offer any nonverbal support? Would you put a hand on their shoulder or perhaps give them a hug? Would you smile? Please visualize how you would respond to your dear colleague. Now take a breath or two, and I want you to think about how you have been responding to your own exhaustion, your own signs of burnout. Maybe you're already deep in a burnout, or maybe you're noticing the early warning signs. How do you respond to yourself when you notice this? What do you say to yourself? And what's the tone that you speak to yourself? You get tense when you speak to yourself? And do you notice any differences between how you would treat a close friend or a close, dear colleague and how you treat yourself? Would you be kinder and more supportive and more encouraging to someone else? Would you tell your friend, take time to rest? It's not the end of the world. If you're tired, you can get through this. Notice the difference in it. I want you to, for those of you who do notice a difference, I'd like you to take a moment to put a hand over your heart and just feel the contact of that hand, feel your heart beating, feel the warmth of this human body. And maybe say to yourself, may I learn to be kind to myself when I'm feeling burned out. May I learn to support myself the same way I would support a dear friend or dear colleague. Just allowing yourself the wish. May I learn to be kind to myself when I'm depleted. Yeah, so let me just ask you to, anyone who likes could share in the chat, what do you notice when you do that? For example, if you do you notice a difference? Do you notice, if you notice that you treat your friend better than yourself, please type a 1 in the chat. If you notice that you automatically are more supportive and encouraging to a friend, please type a 1 in the chat. Thanks, Dharma. I want everyone to notice the 1s, right? We're about 36 people in the room, and there's a lot of 1s. So again, if you notice that you automatically treat your friend better than you treat yourself, please type a 1 in the chat. I just want to point out Agnes typed a 2. Agnes has taken the MSc course 2 times. Agnes has been training herself. and has, I think, been very successful. Right. And Jules. Yeah. I'm glad to see that the people who've taken the course a few times are notice now the difference the other way. Yeah. So this is very important. And you'll see like self-compassion isn't difficult in the sense of understanding it. It's learning how to respond to ourselves the same way that we respond to a good friend. That's the essence of self-compassion. The difficult part of self-compassion is learning how to stand up for ourselves the way that we would stand up for a good friend. But let's take a look at the definition, because I know that some people who've come in the webinar are not familiar with self-compassion. Now, I'm not going to read this slide to you. You can take a look at it. At this stage, I was in a group meeting with Christopher Germer in the last few months, and Chris said there are now more than 4,000 published peer-reviewed studies of self-compassion. There's been an explosion in the last 5 years of research that's getting published, and the research about self-compassion is incredibly strong. People who practice self-compassion are more able to cope with life, more able to be stable, to manage emotions, to stay motivated, and they are more resilient physically and mentally. And it's self-compassion is like a form of wonderful exercise for our brains. It's really incredible, but I'm not going to spend a lot of time on the research, but I just want you to know that there is a scientific validation for the practices that we're going to look at today. So let me quickly just go into the definition of self-compassion and the 3 components of self-compassion, which were developed by Dr. Kristin Neff. And if you have a chance to watch her YouTube talks, Dr. Neff is a remarkable, inspiring person who developed self-compassion in part because of her own challenges in life, but then wanted to do research about it and developed a full psychological model of self-compassion with 3 ingredients. Number 1, mindfulness. Number 2, common humanity. And number 3, self-kindness. And I'd like to just briefly go into each one of these elements. So the mindfulness that Kristin brought forward is a kind of practical mindfulness, a kind of present moment awareness. You know, like being able to enjoy the purple in these gorgeous flowers. This is a picture I took right outside my office. And just to be able to be present, my mind wasn't, mindfulness, because I had mindfulness, I could be present and see, wow, look at this purple, which for me is something that makes me smile and fills me with awe. So I could have a moment of awe in the middle of a day where I'm seeing clients and lecturing and going to meetings and doing paperwork. But that one moment can nourish me because I can be there. I can contact the present moment and see what's happening. I can see what's around me, and I can see what's happening inside me at any given moment. And this is very important, because if we want to take care of our burnout, we have to see it when it's happening. Those moments of stress, those moments of feeling overwhelmed, those moments of feeling angry or resentful, or of feeling alone. Because the moment when we experience it is the moment that we can also take care of it psychologically. So it's a very practical form of mindfulness. Number 2 is common humanity. Common humanity, this is the reason I became an MSc teacher, when I saw that she developed a model that recognized this element of all of us. Because we have a human tendency, when there is pain, we have a tendency to feel alone, separate, and different. Even though feeling pain is one of the most human things that can happen to us. Being in pain, facing challenges, being down, don't believe what you see on Instagram. Don't believe what you see on social media. People don't present their pains, and it's very misleading. It's part of human life to experience difficulty and pain. But sometimes at that moment, our brain does something that makes us feel like we're not a human being anymore. We're different, we're weak, we're abnormal. So we learn to recognize ourselves as human beings. The things that we blame ourselves for, the things that we criticize ourselves for, they're not weakness. They're not difference. They're not abnormal. They're part of being human. And this is already, once we develop this skill, this is a powerful form of self-compassion right from the get-go. And this is not a concept. I want to be clear about this. This is not conceptual. This is a practice, a way of learning to relate to ourselves, because it's how we relate to our friends. And lastly, the third element, self-kindness. What's really interesting about the self-kindness and self-compassion is that you don't need to learn how to be kind. You already know how to be kind. You offer kindness to other people every day, every week. When you see someone you care about suffering, you try to support them automatically. So all it is learning how to bring some of that back to ourselves, learning to respond to ourselves in the same way that we respond to and support a good friend. One of the key self-compassion questions, and that we'll talk about, one of the skills I want to offer you, is learning to ask, what do I need right now? When I'm feeling overwhelmed or depleted at work, what do I need right at that moment? And can I give myself psychologically a little bit of that? This is actually a very deep question, and it does take some time to develop. Plus, we need to understand that there's two sides of self-compassion. There's a tender side of self-compassion and a fierce side of self-compassion. I'm not going to have time to really go into these, but Kristen Neff talks about a mama bear, right? So the tender side is nurturing and comforting and accepting. And there's also a fierce side, which is about taking action in the world to protect ourselves, to motivate ourselves. And again, in burnout, usually to set boundaries or set limits, to be able to say yes to ourselves and sometimes say no to things outside of ourselves. So fierce self-compassion has three elements: to be able to provide for ourselves, to be able to protect ourselves, and to be able to motivate ourselves. Fierce, it's most of us think about self-compassion as being something tender, where we are nurturing and soothing and accepting ourselves, but there's also this fierce side where we can protect, provide, or motivate ourselves. So for those of you who are interested, I'm gonna offer you some skills now, but there's a whole course. There's a whole mindful self-compassion course that you can register for and take. My next course with my remarkable co-teacher, Siri Chandler, will be starting on January the 27th. And I'd like to read you a quick testimonial from someone who completed the course, a wonderful one of our participants from Singapore who completed the course in September. Well, I completed the September course in November. The MSc course was a transformative journey. The course helped me to connect deeply with myself and understand my needs better. It also empowered me to challenge my inner critic and embrace difficult emotions instead of suppressing them. I highly recommend this course to anyone seeking greater self-awareness and inner peace. And this is not that difficult. The course is based on the best state-of-the-art knowledge from neuroscience and positive psychology. It's scientifically based. The course that Siri and I offer is 10 weeks, 2.5 hours a week on a Monday evening here in Southeast Asia. We teach 24 skill practices over those 10 weeks. And we are both experts in our field. Siri is one of Thailand's leading experts on mindfulness, secular mindfulness practice. And I consider myself a kind of an expert on self-compassion. And the results are life-changing. What we hear from participants is that participating in the course and completing the course, and the course has some advantages to this webinar. The course is limited to 22 participants. So we get to go on a journey together, and there's a lot of opportunities in the course. It's structured so there are small group interactions. So you don't just learn from your expert teachers, you also learn and share with each other. And it's a remarkable experience and opportunity to learn together in community and practice the skills together. For those of you who are interested, you can check this out on my website at benweinstein/full course. If you have any questions, you should feel free to email me. And right now, until January the 3rd, there's a remarkable early bird discount. Okay? And please allow me to just share that information before moving on. So let's work on another tool. Now that we've talked about what self-compassion is, let's talk about a second tool for dealing with your burnout and feelings of burnout. And this one, we're going to do this as a written reflection. And this tool is to write an encouraging note to yourself. So we're going to try this out. So please give yourself an opportunity. So again, I guess if you need to type on your device, you could type on your device. But if you have a piece of paper, I want to encourage you to do this freehand with a pen and paper so that because again, we do this in writing because it gives more concentration and more focus. And part of developing self-compassion means not doing what we did by default. You notice how by default, especially if you typed a 1 earlier, by default, we may tend to criticize or blame or undermine ourselves. So we're going to work against that human nature. Because you notice you weren't alone in typing a 1. There's something about being human, something about having a brain and a nervous system that makes us behave that way. We send kindness to other people, but not to ourselves. So we're going to give this a little bit of concentration. So what I want you to do is first, I want you to think about there's 3 ways you can do this. Number 1, you can imagine that you have a wise friend or wise teacher who's writing the note to you. So you're going to do it from the perspective of a wise, compassionate teacher. Or you can do it as if you are writing the letter to a dear friend, someone you really care about, maybe a colleague or a dear friend who's experiencing burnout. Okay, so please choose one of those. Please choose, or whatever way helps you to write this. Either you're imagining that you're a wise teacher writing to yourself, or you're imagining that you yourself, from a strong and centered place, are writing to a dear friend. Okay? And we're going to write a letter that's around 3 paragraphs. So please begin, write a paragraph to acknowledge and validate your experience, your feelings of exhaustion and burnout, the struggle you're having. Like, for example, I might write to myself, "Dear Ben, I know these recent months have been so difficult for you. I know that you've been trying so hard, but you're feeling overwhelmed and stressed because it feels like there's too much to do." So that's acknowledging and validating the experience and your feelings. So please take a moment, see if you can, even if you could just write, if you find it difficult, try to write just 1 sentence to say to yourself, "I see what you've been going through." And then, and of course, please write in the language you feel most comfortable with. It's not necessary to do this in English. Write a paragraph to acknowledge yourself as a human being and that you're not alone in feeling this way and having this experience. So, for example, I might write to myself as part of my letter, so many people are experiencing burnout right now. You're not alone in this. It doesn't mean you're weak. It certainly doesn't mean you're abnormal. This is part of being human, and living through this moment is experiencing burnout. You're definitely not alone in it. So many people are experiencing this in your profession right now. Those are words I might say to myself. But again, any words that connect for you, that help you to acknowledge and validate that you're still a human being. You're not weak. You're not abnormal. This is what burnout is like. And one paragraph uh, to express kindness and encouragement and caring for yourself. Again, you know, for example, you might write, or I might write to myself, I believe in you. I know that you can get through this. I know that you can find a way forward, even though this is hard. You still have strengths. You still have resources, and I'm going to help you get through it. So again, imagining what you might say to a friend or what a wise teacher might say to you. So just at least, and again, it doesn't even have to be a paragraph, maybe just one sentence. So we'll take about another minute in silence to work on that. Okay. And now, if you're not finished writing, please feel free to take more time. I'm not giving you as much time as I would like, or as much time as it really takes. This is usually something you need 5 or 10 minutes. What I'd like you to do now is take just an additional moment, put a hand over your heart, because this is kind of a symbol of your intention to be kind to yourself, and read back what you've written. Again, the same way you'd say it to a friend. Just read it back to yourself. See if you can let it sink in. And if you like, if anyone would like to, maybe I would like to invite people to share in the chat. One word, how do you feel when you read this back to yourself? What do you notice when you read this back to yourself? Nandini feels emotional. You feel some welling up. Thanks, Nandini. Amazement, self-supportive, relieved, relief. Yeah, and sometimes that can also be but feeling relief can open up emotion as well. When we feel safe, feels calmer, emotional. Yeah, because and remember, sometimes we need to release our emotions. Carmen feels seen. Yeah, this is a very powerful exercise. So please, Sang Moon feels a bit overwhelmed and relieved. So please feel free to try this exercise. And I want to encourage you to either carry this paper around with you or to take a picture of it. Because again, this isn't just an exercise you can do once. This is an exercise you can repeat by taking a little bit of time in your day to be a resource for yourself at difficult moments. To bring this attitude of supporting yourself, especially when this comes up in the middle of work. And let's talk about that, because our next topic that we're going to talk about is resistance. The way in which, we have a natural human tendency to resist pain. I'm not gonna get all clinical and psychologist and talk about the details, but it's the metaphor I like here is like a beach ball, right? And I want you to think about the nature of a beach ball is to float. And I want you to think about what happens when you try to push the beach ball underwater. When you try to push the beach ball underwater, it resists. It wants to be on the surface. So on the one hand, we have a tendency to try and push our emotions away. But you can ask yourself, does it help? Because we do know that in burnout, there are some real negative consequences. If you have a fear, fighting your fear can create panic attacks. Suppressing your sadness can lead to depression. Ignoring your body's need for sleep, which many people, I've been impressed. I've never had this ability, but I've met many, many people, many, many clients who are able to just ignore their need for sleep until it's too late. But ignoring your need for sleep, resisting your body's need for sleep can result in exhaustion, resenting work demands that you can't control that are unavoidable, can raise your blood pressure. Pretending you're not overwhelmed will ensure that you continue to be overwhelmed. So resisting doesn't tend to help us. So what I want to do is I want to do a visualization to see if we can replace resistance, which remember, resistance is a normal human reaction. See if we can start to replace resistance with self-compassion at that moment when overwhelm or anxiety or sadness or resentment comes up. Okay? So let's try this out. So please sit in a comfortable position. For this one, this is not a written one yet. You can take some notes at the end. And just bring to mind some moments of stress in your work. So for example, that might be something about your workload. It might be some difficult people you have to deal with at work. Or it might be something about the work that you're doing. It may be that don't have enough money, or that it's that your job is not secure. So just bring into your mind some of these things about your work that are stressing you and adding to your burnout. Now ask yourself, how are you relating to the stress that's being caused by your work at the moment it arises? For example, are you avoiding or denying your own stress? Maybe by procrastinating or going home and just binging on TV? Are you resentful of it and angry about it in your mind and trying to push it away? Or are you lost in self-blame? What's wrong with me? Why am I so weak? Which can also be another form of resistance. How do you usually respond right in the moment when these feelings arise? To yourself, not responding externally, but how do you respond to yourself? So please consider what could happen if you try to accept the present moment reality instead of resisting it. So see if you can visualize yourself in that moment, giving yourself some support and compassion. So right now, practice that by placing a hand over your heart and saying to yourself, I see you. I see that you're feeling afraid or overwhelmed or angry, whatever your feeling is, just saying to yourself, I see you. I see what you're feeling. I see how difficult this is. And again, if there's any kind words you could offer yourself or any encouragement you could offer yourself, like, I'm here for you. Are you going to get through this? Just acknowledging and validating your feelings. That's all. Just letting it be there. Don't have to fight it. Okay. And then opening your eyes. And again, if you like, making some notes about how that felt. So again, this is just an example. In the previous exercise, we wrote you a note. That was one way of responding to yourself and supporting yourself, making yourself feel supported or giving yourself some relief. This is another example of a different kind of exercise for responding to yourself in the moment when things are coming up. You might like to practice this. This is actually a very deep kind of exercise. In the full course, we practice many different ways of responding to yourself, which we don't have full time for in the webinar, but the more you practice on your own or read or watch YouTube videos, you may have more ideas on your own. Because I'm going to keep going on because I have 3 more skills I'd like to share with you during the webinar. And I am aware of time. 3 more skills at least. And again, my goal for you is just to plant some seeds that you can water and take care of. And if you can give those seeds some sunlight and water, which means thinking about it, practicing it, hopefully it will grow for you, because these are resources that are part of you. And the more you think about them and work on them, the more they will grow, whether you take the course or don't take the course. Although again, I support taking the course. So I want to talk briefly about this question I mentioned before. What do I need? What do I need? Because this is such a powerful question, especially the psychological element. So on the side of tender self-compassion, usually, and I think you're already noticing it, I think when you've been practicing, you've been noticing it in the webinar, that we need comfort and acceptance and validation and rest. These are the kind of tender things. And this is not a full list, these are just examples that we all need to feel accepted. And when we offer our self-acceptance, we feel relief, we feel soothed, and maybe we feel safe enough to open up and cry, because that's what we needed. We needed to cry, to express that feeling. So this is one of the strengths of tender self-compassion, and we don't even have to change anything in our life to already support ourselves tenderly. And then on the other side, on fierce self-compassion, that's taking action. I might find that I need to say something, or I need to set some boundaries, or I need to make some changes in my life. And of course, as we do, these are difficult, although I'm going to offer you a skill to help build up the courage to do these fierce self-compassion things, because this is the most difficult for many people, especially here in Asia, for many women suffering from burnout, learning how to speak up, how to set boundaries, how to say no. This is a challenge all over the world, but especially here in Asia with hierarchical cultures and the sense of social harmony and not wanting to distress others or impose on others. It can be a real challenge to develop that fierce self-compassion, but it is possible. It absolutely is possible. So so here's a skill to start to work on. What do you need? Because what do you need is a very deep question. And so there's a technique I call the 4 N's, the 4 N's of what do I need? So the first N is to notice your experience. The second N is to name your feeling. And that's what we just did. We did it in both of the exercises we've already done. Notice what you're feeling while you're feeling it. Name it. Oh, I'm angry. I'm afraid. I feel overwhelmed. I feel upset, whatever it is. And then ask yourself, what do I need right now? And see if you can give yourself a little bit of that. So if you decide, oh, I need some comfort, could you put a hand over your heart and say, I'm here for you? Or if you need acceptance, can you put a hand over your heart or give yourself a hug and say, oh, I know you're stressed. I understand you're stressed. I see you. And notice how that shifts your energy. When you are there for yourself, it already shifts your energy, even if you haven't made a big change yet, because it's a change in how you relate to yourself. So you can make self-compassion a small step you take, and then you go on with your day. This is very much a practice that you could do in the middle of your work or in the middle of your night. When you wake up and you can't sleep and you're stressed, I encourage you to put a hand over your heart, just like this, or to give yourself a hug and just breathe for 10 or 15 minutes. Breathe and read your letter to yourself and see if you can give yourself enough relief to go back to sleep and rest. That's the 4th tool I want to offer you today. So now let's talk to the perfectionists. I want to offer you a skill to help perfectionists release the need to be perfect. Because remember, for many perfectionists, this is tied to this issue of my worth comes from my work. Sometimes they go together. So I want to offer you a skill, and this one we're going to visualize. I don't have any notes for this. So what I want you to do for this skill is, again, let your hands be empty. And I want you to think about some aspect of your work. Think about a moment where your perfectionism comes up. For example, Maybe you look in your inbox and you think, I have to answer every single email. Or maybe you're being a caregiver and you think you have to fill all the needs of the person you're caring for in the way that they expect. Or maybe you're working on a report and you're under a tight deadline and you feel like the report has to be at a certain place, even though you know other people are submitting reports all the time that aren't like that and it's fine. But you feel like your report has to be better. So identify the moment where perfectionism comes up in your work life. Visualize that moment and notice the tension of it. Now I want you to imagine that you you fail to meet those expectations, or you make a mistake. So you submit the report and someone said, "Oh, there's a mistake." What does that feel like if you just imagine that it's not perfect? And notice what feels important to you. Is it the work performance that feels important to you, or how other people will perceive you? What is the part that feels important to you? Will people laugh at you? Will you be embarrassed? Will you feel like a failure? Or other people will think you're a failure? Notice what fear comes up for you if you don't follow your perfectionism. And again, what emotions come up for you if you imagine not meeting those expectations, either your expectations or your idea about other people's expectations? Is it fear or stress or disappointment or sadness, anxiety or anger? Maybe a mix of feelings. So just notice what's coming up for you if you're going to break those perfectionistic rules. Notice the tension in your body. And if it feels comfortable for you, I want to invite you to take a few deep breaths, saying to yourself, breathing in and out, I calm my body. And if you like, if it feels okay for you, I want you to put a hand over your heart again, because this is our symbol of self-soothing. This is our symbol that your intention is to support yourself as you support a friend. And now I want you to, in your heart, speak to yourself about this desire to be perfect. Like the way you would speak to a friend if you saw that their perfectionism was hurting them. Like you might say, gosh, it's okay to not be perfect. It's okay to make mistakes. It's only human. Or you might say, your value doesn't depend on this work. Your value comes from being human. Or you might like to say, if you feel, I love you and I accept you just as you are, to yourself. Just finding the words that feel right for you, but let you maybe saying, I am imperfect and I can accept myself as imperfect. I can't be everything for everyone all the time, and that's okay. I'm not alone in that. So again, see if you can find the message that's right for you. If your feeling of resistance or anxiety is very strong, as it is for some people who are perfectionists, just say to yourself, I'm here for you. I'm not going anywhere and I won't abandon you. Just do the best you can and take it step by step. Just let yourself be as you are, an imperfect, messy human being. Because no matter how hard we try, that's what we are. Because that's how life is. It's not our fault. And remember, you're not alone. We're all like this. Again. And then whenever you're ready, open your eyes. Make some notes. If any of that connected for you, please make some notes. Make some notes about what connected for you, which words. Yeah. And again, the invitation here is it could you practice this at 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 the moments in your workflow, in the moments in your day when you see that perfectionism coming up, when that voice says to you, it's got to be like this. Because again, that's a lot of tension. It's a lot of tension. Because very frequently we can still do a very good job when we release that tension of it must be this. Frequently, I can bring some of that tension to preparing a webinar. I have to include this and I have to include that and I have to include that. But and then I'm like, no, I was I was going to offer 7 or 8 skills originally. And I was like, you know what? There's barely enough time for 6. So I'm letting go of 7 and 8. And it's fine. It's already a lot to pack in. So I do want to offer you, and I am probably going to run over by about 5 minutes, not including time for Q&A. I want to offer you one more that I think is so important. And this is the most difficult one for many, many people. And so please, I want to offer a skill for learning how to say no and set boundaries. And when we practice this, please remember that Rome wasn't built in a day. That this is, if learning how to set boundaries and say no is a huge accomplishment. And for many people, depending on the organization you work for and depending on the culture you're living in, you may be fighting upstream. That means you swimming upstream. That means the current is moving against you. And it requires a lot of courage and a lot of strength. And I know this for a fact, especially in a hierarchical culture, where if you're a younger person in a hierarchical culture working in an organization, it might be very difficult to develop some of these skills. And there's a kind of reality there. It's not just a form of, it's not that you are weak. It's that this is genuinely very, very, very difficult. So because of the difficulty and because all of you will be practicing this for the first time, we're going to do this as a written reflection. Okay, so please bring a piece of paper. I'm going to ask you some questions, and I would like you to write out your answers. Again, because this is difficult, I want you to concentrate more on the task. Okay, so I'd like you to think of a situation, and think of a situation at work where you didn't set a boundary, you didn't set a limit, but you wish you had. Maybe something that's finished now, not something you're in the middle of, but something that you experienced maybe a week ago or a month ago. Some situation at work where you wish you'd set where you wish you had set a boundary or a limit, but you didn't. And ideally, this would be one of the situations that's contributing to your feeling of burnout, where you wish you'd set a limit, and because you didn't set a limit, it made you feel more tired, more depleted, more resentful, whatever that is for you. For example, this could be something like you agreed to a coworker's request to take on their work, even though you already had all of your own work. You didn't have extra time. Or maybe someone said something to you that bothered you or stressed you or upset you, but you didn't say anything about it. Or maybe the fact that after doing all your hard work and taking home your work, then the people at home expect you to do all the housework and cleaning and washing and cooking and preparing food or cleaning up after the food, even though there are other people there who could help and could do some of it. So again, please visualize. Please don't choose a traumatic situation. For example, if someone is being abusive to you. So if your boss is bullying you, please don't choose that, because that's a much more challenging situation. So take a moment and just choose one. If many come up to your mind, just choose one, please, and write a brief description. Ben asked me to do his report, and I said yes, even though I was already very busy. Whatever it is for you. Now, question number 2 is, ask yourself, what stopped me from setting a boundary I wanted to set? What stopped me from saying no? Or again, even in a polite way, it is possible to say no in a polite way. What stopped me from saying no? What stopped me from setting a limit? What stopped me from going home on time? Were you worried about the consequences? For example, retaliation. So write down what what were you worried about? What was your fear? Or did other thoughts come up? Like, it wouldn't be nice. I have to be nice. Or this person won't like me. Or the group won't accept me. I'll be excluded. Or this would be selfish. It would be selfish if I don't help. So or maybe it felt so emotional to you, like you felt guilty, or you felt afraid, or you felt self-doubt. Again, there's many, so just ask yourself, what stopped you from setting a boundary? And maybe the answer is, I never even think of setting a boundary. I just do everything. That's also possible. But then ask yourself, what would it feel like? Because usually, if we do say yes to everything, it's underneath that there's some fear or some guilt. So even if you never think of setting a boundary at that moment, ask yourself, what's preventing you from thinking of it? Now, as you do this task, please notice any self-blame or self-criticism that's arising and see if you can acknowledge that, but release it. Can you offer yourself some support? You might like to put a hand over your heart and say, you were doing the best you could with everything going on in your life. You were doing the best you could at that moment. I don't need to criticize myself. I don't need to blame myself. And now we're going to see if you can call up some energy of fierce self-compassion, just to see what happens. So for fierce compassion, just for a moment, put the pen down, sit up straight in a posture that feels like it embodies strength and courage to you, and place your fist gently over your heart, because the fist is a symbol of our intention to be courageous, or of our intention to let this fierce energy. So feel your spine and feel the straightness of your spine, and then that fist over your heart. Remind yourself and say to yourself in your own heart, my needs are important too. I have the right to set some limits. It's okay to stand up for myself. It's not selfish. I don't always have to do what everyone else wants. So again, just acknowledging a reality. My needs are important too. I have the right to say no. And having brought up the spirit of fierce self-compassion, now imagine if you could have done it differently. Is there a way that you could draw a boundary in that situation? Could you imagine doing it in a way that was firm and clear and kind? In a way that was respectful of yourself and respectful of the other people? Is that possible? And if any idea occurs to you, please open your eyes and write it down. Is there a way to set a boundary that feels firm and clear and respectful, respectful of you and respectful of the other people? Taking a few moments to consider what you might say and how you might say it, even if it feels uncomfortable. But the question I'd like you to consider now is, how does it feel when you imagine setting the boundary? If you were able to do that, it might feel a little uncomfortable, a little scary. In particular, how does it affect your feelings of burnout? If you imagine that you could start setting a boundary, even if it's a little bit scary, even if it feels uncomfortable to do it, what impact could that have on your feelings of depletion and being burned out? That's the sixth self-compassion tool I'd like to share with you today. Recognizing, please don't expect that you would be able to do that perfectly. But continue to ask yourself this question, and maybe continue to repeat that exercise and asking yourself how you might start to do this, how you might take some very small steps to be courageous and start to set some limits that are respectful of you as a human being and respectful of other people as well. It's not about blaming anyone. It's not about blaming them, and it's not about blaming you. And seeing what happens and what it feels like. So now I'd like to invite everyone just to take a few moments to ask yourself, what would you like to remember from the webinar? And make some notes. Which skills connected the most for you today? Please don't expect the perfection that you will remember and use everything. That's not reasonable. But maybe there were one or two things where you really felt some energy that's useful. Please make note of that. And please notice how you might like to apply that. Thanks so much, everyone, for being here. I'm going to stop the recording now, and then we can take a few minutes for some Q&A. Let me just figure out how to do that. And of course, if you need to go, thanks very much for being here. And if you have